So the first thing we'll talk about is how they're dispersed. So population is not referring to the entire species. You usually wouldn't say a population of tigers and be referring to all tigers in the world. Typically, you're looking at a population of tigers. And so the question is how are tigers dispersed on a landscape? How is a kelp forest dispersed in a landscape? Are they the same everywhere? Randomly dispersed? Clumped? And so that's what we're going to be taking a look at. We're going to talk about each of these three. So for example, in clumped and uniform and random, each of those green dots represents one individual. But as you can see, like here, I can actually see distinct populations. Here is one group of tigers, and here is another group of tigers. Not all species do this, though. Here you see something that's uniform or random. So when I'm talking about dispersion, we're really talking about where are these organisms located in relation to one another. Is there space between them? Do they just kind of all disperse in the environment? Are they territorial? Etc. So the first one we'll talk about is clumped. And I highly recommend these graphs or these images you see on the previous page to kind of sketch those out with each of these different dispersion patterns that we talk about. So the first one is clumped, and the reason we'll talk about this one first, it's the most common. This is what we see. Humans are clumped. We're clumped in really big cities. Now, of course, we got people who live in the middle of nowhere, but for the most part, we're clumped. There's a whole bunch of reasons why organisms do this, why humans do this, why fish do this, why dolphins do this. One reason can be socially. So for example, dolphins. Dolphins need to be around one another. Humans, for the most part, we need to be around one another. We would die in isolation because we need that interaction with other organisms. So same thing with dolphins, with whales, with chimpanzees. So that's one reason why clumped is seen so often. It could also be seen due to reproduction. So it's much easier to reproduce with other members of your species if you are around other members of your species. It can also be used for feeding. So going back to dolphins, dolphins will work together to feed on a school of fish. And it's really fascinating watching them do this. Some shark species do this as well. And then related to feeding, if you're the one being fed upon, there literally is a safety in numbers. And that's what you see in this image here of this school of fish. Fish make these dense schools for safety. It's actually interesting because you would think as a fish, you want to be in the center of the school, right? You are the furthest from the outside. Nothing is going to come eat you. But it's actually wrong. I'm not saying you want to be on the outside either. You're right. If you're on the outside, you're dead. You kind of want to be somewhere between the center and the outside. And the reason for that is because at the very middle of the school, there's actually very little oxygen. And these guys can actually suffocate and die from being in the middle. You have all these fish on the outside of your school, all of them taking oxygen out of the water, which means less oxygen is available to those fish in the middle. So fun fact for you, but you should definitely write that down. So not only fish, but a lot of smaller organisms are going to be in large groups for safety. There is a great predator defense. Think about anthills. You know, if you've ever stepped on an anthill or the sort, like they all work together to screw you over. So it provides a lot of safety. And so we see this a lot in nature. Now this is related to animals, but plants are dispersed across the landscape as well. So one example, or one reason why plants might be found clumped is depending on their seed dispersal. Some plants literally just drop their seeds like right below them. And there's not much opportunity for those seeds to move further. So they drop their seeds and it doesn't fall far from the tree. Which means that if it does grow, if it does germinate, it's right next to another tree. And so this tree grows, it drops its seeds. Well, those seeds are all around that tree. There's really very little opportunity for those seeds to disperse across a wider landscape. So just an example of how we could see this clumped dispersion in our plant species. So go ahead and pause here and take a look at this video. This video on YouTube is looking at a school of fish, and it's just kind of amazing what these schools look like. So getting an idea of what this clumped dispersion looks like. So pause here, click this link, and then come back afterwards. The next type of dispersion we have is uniform. So uniform dispersion, we see this in animals that are territorial. So they want to be in a group, but they don't. Maybe they want to be in a group for reproduction or for safety, but within their group, they're dispersed very, very evenly apart. So that's what we mean by uniform, is evenly spaced apart. Now, penguins are kind of a weird one because they are clumped, but within their clump, they're uniform. But a lot of the big cats, jaguars, for example, they defend a territory, and a lot of their territories are about the same size. So they're defending this territory, and there's a certain amount of space between them and the next territory, and the next territory, and the next territory. They're not clumped together, they are evenly spaced apart from one another. And so you kind of see this here. In plants, we also see uniform dispersion. It's a little bit rarer, but for example, the black walnut tree. The black walnut tree releases poisons and toxin out of its roots, and the point of those toxins is to infect other plants and kill other plants so that that individual tree is not competing for sunlight, competing for water, competing for nutrients. But even another black walnut tree would actually also be infected and harmed by those toxins. So nothing can grow around a black walnut tree. But the second those toxins get a little bit lighter and kind of fade away, the seeds that black walnut is dropping, if it lands just outside of that mark, well, it can land and germinate and grow, and it takes 3 feet for that to happen. Well, that new black walnut tree does the same thing. It grows, releases toxins, drops its seeds, and only the seeds that are at least 3 feet away from the tree can grow. And so we're seeing this more as you can almost think of it as a black walnut tree territory. They want to defend their space. Same thing with animals with territories, which is causing this even dispersion. If you take a look at this video, you'll actually see another example of a bird that has territories. And this video does a good job at kind of outlining what those territories look like, and you can tell they're similar in size. So go ahead and pause here and click on this link that's popping up, and then come back here to continue on with the lecture. Last but not least, we have random dispersion. And random dispersion happens when the reproductive material of that organism is released into the environment. So for example, a dandelion. A dandelion's seeds do not drop right below it. A dandelion does not release any toxins to make it uniform at all. Instead, you just blow on it and they go. The seeds just fly away somewhere. Maybe they'll land in a clump, maybe they'll be uniform across each other, maybe they'll be here and they'll be here. It's all random, like we don't know. The wind is literally taking the seeds. Who knows where it'll be? So an example of reproductive material just being released into the environment with no rhyme or reason for it. This also happens in the environment. So looking at most things in the ocean, a lot of organisms release sperm and egg directly into the water. And the hope is that that sperm will find an egg and make a baby, and that baby grows up. But where that baby ends up growing up, who knows? It could be close by, it could be far away, they never see their parents again, we don't know. Now maybe as adults they might find one another and clump with one another, but for the most part, a majority of their life is spent just randomly dispersed in the ocean until they find other organisms of their species. But they didn't start that way. There are other species, if you look at clams and oysters, if you have the right substrate, they'll kind of be all over the place because they just release their stuff into the environment. So of these three different dispersion patterns, the most common one that you're looking at is our clumped. Random and uniform are kind of both on the same page as far as the number of different species that show that kind of dispersion. And as a population biologist, this might be important to you. You know, if you're trying to estimate the size of the jaguar community, if you can only find 5, but they are all 5 miles apart from each other, you might be able to say, well, here's some very similar habitat. If you keep going that way, I'm sure if I were to go another 5 miles, I'd probably find another one. So it can help predict where organisms can be found.